Metal Gear Solid was once my favorite franchise in all of gaming. In fact, I opened my video on MGS4 from 2019 with that very sentiment.
Metal Gear Solid is my favorite franchise in the history of video games. Reviewing the games over the past few years has really taught me that.
But things are different now. For those much newer subscribers who don't know, Metal Gear actually used to be a pretty core part of my identity on YouTube, before it became Sonic stuff. I started my Metal Gear retrospective back in 2016 and finished it with Phantom Pain in 2019. Over 6 years have passed since I last regularly covered the topic. In that time, I've made numerous references to what I said at the top of the video, that Metal Gear and I don't have the same relationship we used to. I still own various versions of every game, I still retain the knowledge of the series that I had, it just stopped being my favorite game franchise, and somewhere along the line I had a lot more issues with the games I used to consider all-time greats. Of course, I have considered revisiting the games to make much better coverage of them, but for a while I figured it was pointless. I mean, Metal Gear fans still love the games, and the series was basically dead anyway, so why should I rain on the parade? But now the Metal Gear series is back, because this month we're being graced with Metal Gear Solid Delta Snake Eater, a modern-day remake of the PS2 classic Metal Gear Solid 3. I was kinda concerned at the prospect of an MGS3 remake when it got announced, but the more time passed, the more I was thinking, you know, this could actually turn out pretty good if they play their cards right. So now that the series is back, I thought it would be a good time to replay some old favorites and talk about them a little bit. But I'm not here for hot takes that make people mad, I'm just here to be honest with my thoughts on these games. We can talk more about it in the MGS2 video, but years ago when covering the earlier installments, I didn't really know what I was doing and then later became an angry fanboy towards the later games. Now I feel like I can develop my own thoughts better, so that's the goal. For today's video, it is as the name implies. I'm going to be talking about Metal Gear Solid and its remake, The Twin Snakes. The MGS1 remake has been given a lot of flack in the 20 years since it was released in the GameCube. Looking at where this remake went right and wrong can help discuss MGS1 as a whole and give us a frame of reference when going into MGS Delta at the end of the month. I've always been a fan of Twin Snakes, but also accepting that it has limitations. But Delta seems to be a really high priority title for Konami, which Twin Snakes seemed to not be. So I think it'll be better. But that's all the more reason to look back at this game and discuss it. As you should hopefully know, Metal Gear Solid is the third mainline installment of the series, following Metal Gear and Metal Gear 2. It was the series' first time in 3D and pushed the boundaries of cinematics and storytelling in games with its in-depth story that shocked the gaming world back when it came out on PlayStation in 1998. In it, Solid Snake is out of retirement, forced into a mission by his former commander, Colonel Roy Campbell. Snake is to infiltrate Shadow Moses Island, rescue the DARPA chief and the Arms Tech president, and find out if the rogue Foxhound agents, Psycho Mantis, Vulcan Raven, Sniper Wolf, Decoy Octopus, Revolver Ocelot, and Liquid Snake actually possess the ability to fire a nuke and stop them if they do. Along the way, Snake interacts with a cast of unforgettable characters and is thrust into tense situations every few minutes, culminating in a battle to destroy Metal Gear Rex, the latest model of the nuclear tank the series gets its name from. Like I said, this game came out in 1998 and was an instant classic and spawned the Metal Gear franchise as we know it today. It really is one of the most iconic and influential stealth action games of all time. Fast forward a few years and you have the remake. Back then, the technology of gaming was evolving so quickly that relatively recent games were being made obsolete very fast. Like, there was a whole galaxy of difference between the gameplay and graphics of MGS1 and MGS2 on PlayStation 2, despite only releasing 3 years later. The Metal Gear Solid series planted its flag on Sony's PlayStation, but it was not owned by Sony, so therefore the games could be on anything Konami wanted it to release on, which is part of where the remake comes into play. Nintendo also wanted a piece of the Metal Gear Solid pie. Hideo Kojima, creator of the Metal Gear series, met with Nintendo's Shigeru Miyamoto and Satoru Iwata to discuss Metal Gear on GameCube. But since Kojima and his team were deep into development on Metal Gear Solid 3 for PlayStation 2, he pitched the idea of the studio Silicon Knights developing an MGS1 remake on GameCube that would take the graphics and gameplay of MGS2 and fuse it with the world and story of MGS1, and thus Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes was born. But then that begs the question, what could possibly have gone so wrong to lead to fan backlash? I mean, MGS1 is a beloved classic for its story and atmosphere, and MGS2 was also a critical darling with gameplay people loved. This should have been a match made in heaven that fans also gobbled up and adored, right? Well, that's what the opening minutes of the video will focus on. The case against Metal Gear Solid: The Twin Snakes. The gameplay mechanics that the Twin Snakes inherits from MGS2 are smoother ground control, dodge rolling, hanging over ledges, guard AI buffs, having to dispose of bodies to not get caught, and shooting in first person with all your weapons. Among other things, but those are the big ones. What you will often hear from longtime Metal Gear fans is that the Twin Snakes had a fine concept for a game, but the level design from MGS1 is virtually identical in Twin Snakes. and that causes a problem because MGS1's level design was made with limited controls and combat in mind. A few years ago, this excellent video on why the Twin Snakes is a lackluster remake came out, and it showed a perfect example of this in the tank hangar, the very beginning of the game. If you took the upper air vent in the original, you need to exit the vent, dodge a camera, get down the stairs, avoid another camera and guards to reach the elevator, but with the addition of Snake hopping over rails in the remake, you can just do this, thus skipping the entire section. Another example I can point to is the stairs you need to travel up and down to reach the Hind boss fight. In the original, there'd be gun cameras and you needed chaff grenades to temporarily disable. On the way back down, you'd need to do the same. Not super difficult, but in the remake, you just shoot the cameras with your SOCOM and that's that. The walk back down is now nothing because the cameras are destroyed. Cameras are everywhere on Shadow Moses Island, but you'd never have to use your chaff grenades for anything in Twin Snakes because every camera can just get shot down. The blast furnace doesn't require you to engage with its design either. You can skip this whole part of waiting on the ledge over the lava by just hopping over the rail at the entrance and jumping down. That does massive damage, but you can recover because the game is really easy. But then I also realized that there are beams to grab onto on the way down. No need to avoid a single guard. Every combat encounter the original game made you engage with is now reduced to ash in the remake, something even IGN mentioned in its review when the game dropped in 2004. When Snake and Meryl are cornered by an enemy rush, players of MGS1 will have to survive because by this point you'll only have the SOCOM, which was a weapon you could accidentally skip if you didn't search the helipad thoroughly, and you don't have a lot of health at this point, so enemies with guns and grenades are bad news. In Twin Snakes, your health doesn't grow as the game goes on, you have a full bar from the beginning, and with the first person shooting you can literally stand at the door and shoot enemies before they even have a chance to walk in. I'm not kidding, it's very broken. Revolver Ocelot is much the same. The designers thought of ways to make it interesting with the first-person aiming. For example, you can shoot the pipes to blind him for a bit, but landing headshots does so much damage that you can finish the boss in seconds. And this is on hard mode, I might add. The elevator ambushes are made effortless since you just do one headshot and the guys die immediately, when in the original, I actually died in the first one when replaying it for the video. The Tank, Psycho Mantis, the Hind, Vulcan Raven, Metal Gear Rex, they're all the same. Standing and shooting and tanking damage is totally doable in the remake. Not the most fun solution in most cases, but doable. Vulcan Raven can be shot in the head with a war of attrition, but it's more fun to place traps and such, so I just fight him like I would in the original. But the rest are very watered down. I didn't break the slightest sweat fighting Metal Gear Rex in the remake, but in the original I died multiple times because the mech did an appropriate amount of damage and was difficult to avoid the attacks of. And so, this is an area where Delta has me the most curious. Clearly, the Twin Snakes gave Snake far too much power over his environment, if that makes sense. It doesn't really matter if guards are smarter and can see Snake from further distances because picking them off with the M9 sleep darts is effortless, and the bosses are very easy to cheese. This could have been combated with bigger changes like overhauling the level design and boss arenas, or even just smaller changes like making you less powerful. Here's an idea. Make everything hurt a lot, and maybe bring back the original's upgrade system. That way, the further you get, the more comfortable you'll feel with your ammo pool and rations, but early on, everything will be so tense because your first person aiming can only get so far when everything kills you pretty quickly. So fast forward 20 years, and now Metal Gear Solid Delta looks pretty clearly like an MGS5 styled remake of MGS3. Not exactly the gameplay of MGS5, but I mean that it's a modern style remake of a classic game. The level design looks pretty unaltered from the original MGS3, however I'm less worried about it being broken though, because it's not adding in every mechanic from MGS4 or 5 or whatever, it's just bringing back what Snake could do in the original, just with quality of life improvements and current gen handling and controls like third person shooting. That's fine. The original MGS3 already had things like first person aiming, so I feel like it would be difficult to outright break the game like the Twin Snakes did, but because of the precedent set by Twin Snakes reusing exact levels with MGS2 gameplay, it is something to keep our eyes on for MGS Delta. But like I said, I do think Delta's doing it intelligently. But then, that's the thing. I understand and even agree with the criticisms leveled against the Twin Snakes for it ruining the game balance of MGS1 with all these bells and whistles dropped in. However, my thoughts on the subject are more complicated than what I presented thus far. Sure, the Twin Snakes breaks MGS1 by making it so easy, however the question I want to pose is, was MGS1 ever really that great or well balanced of a game to begin with? This is not factoring in cutscenes or music or any of that. I'm talking about the gameplay experience of MGS1 that Twin Snakes was breaking. What I've come to feel in recent years is that there really wasn't that much of a super fun game to break here. MGS1's pacing is really not that great. For example, you'll avoid puddles and snow and lights within 10 minutes of playing, but then never see these obstacles again. so the game's most challenging set pieces are all at the beginning. Once you really get into the game, things slow down considerably. The most uninterrupted segments of gameplay in MGS1 is parts where you backtrack to earlier areas. Meryl is shot by Sniper Wolf and Snake needs to travel back to get the PSG-1 from the armory, which means going back through like 6 areas to get it and going back through those same 6 areas to return to the battle. The game needed to put some distance between Snake and Meryl for her to get captured, but this trek is so long and filled with almost nothing that it's not fun to play. Twin Snakes retains this set piece, however, you only need to go back 2 rooms to get the PSG-1T, the Sleep Dart sniper rifle. The actually lethal sniper rifle with more ammo capacity is still in the armory where it was in the OG game, but if you want to get back to the fight quicker, you have the option of getting the PSG-1T instead. The only bosses I didn't mention before were Sniper Wolf and Gray Fox, because, yeah, the Twin Snakes ruined many battles, but many of them weren't that fun to begin with. Sniper Wolf was improved tenfold in the remake because the controls for aiming are so much better. In the original, Snake could only aim his PSG-1 by laying on the ground, and then actually aiming with the thing was a nightmare because it moves so slowly that Sniper Wolf could pretty easily hit you while you try to collect your bearings. Then there's the need to take diazepam to stop your hands from shaking, which will ruin your shots if you don't have any. Both games do this, but controlling the rifle feels so much better than the original. Then a boss like Gray Fox was horrible in the original game. He just does so much damage that I've seen new players get bottlenecked here. But then in the last phase, it's also easy to cheese completely without Twin Snake's mechanics. At the end, Gray Fox will get close to you, teleport around you, and do a high damage punch, but if you hug this wall, he can't do that, and the result is thus.
Hurt me more! More! That's it! I remember that punch!
It's more tense than the original before this point, but in the remake it's easy to cheese in the same way. Yes, Ocelot is basically ruined in the remake, but in the original you run around in a circle trying to hit a target you can't see. To be fair, you will feel like a gaming badass if you hit at an angle where he's on the run, but I don't think it's a fun boss. Neither is tossing grenades into the tank, nor is spamming the circle button against Liquid. The Hind might have been easy to just sit there spamming stinger missiles with in the remake, but in the original it's basically the same, just with less abilities to evade attacks with. Vulcan, Raven, and Metal Gear Rex are the only boss fights in the original I actually liked playing. Raven especially because it uses the sneaking mechanics in a boss fight where you had your whole toolkit to use and needed to find a way to survive against an opponent that's built like a brick and is carrying a Gatling gun. But the rest are either fine at best or absolutely terrible. Again, I'm just talking gameplay here, not story, not music, not aura. Mechanically, I don't feel like MGS1 bosses or sneaking mechanics being ruined is much of a loss because I don't think they were that good anyway. They were made bad in a different kind of way, which is not really a defense of the Twin Snakes, but I'm trying to highlight how I think Twin Snakes' failure is a lack of improvement, not ruining what was already good. The level design also starts falling apart towards the end of MGS1. Like I said before, this stealth action game doesn't really have a lot of stealth action by the end. The obstacles are all but put away after a few minutes, and past building 1 of Shadow Moses, most rooms don't even have guards in them. If there are, it's a small amount and they're easy to avoid. Building 3 has virtually nothing in it. You get past the blast furnace and all that's left is these elevator rooms, one of which has a gun camera and mines in it, but the Soliton radar is disabled so you can't use the mine detector to see it coming and can't use the radar to see the camera either, so you just run into one of them and get hit. That's just bullshit level design and there's no way to avoid that mine without prior knowledge. The Twin Snakes removes that mine and leaves the radar on so you can see the camera. I think this is a superior balance, even if the level design is quite minimal at the end. But the problem is that both games really fail to offer a lot at the end mechanically. The blast furnace is the only real sneaking room in the entire third act. Most of it is spent on the PAL key. Snake thinks using the PAL key will disable Metal Gear Rex, but to do that, Snake needs to use this key at room temperature, and then freeze the key and use it on the second computer, and then heat the key to use it on the third and final one. What does this mean in the original? Snake drops the key in the drainage ditch, so you need to find the key, then climb all the way back up these ladders to put it in at room temperature, then climb all the way back down and go back to the Raven boss fight room to freeze the key, run back, climb up, put the key in, climb down, run all the way back to the blast furnace, heat it up, run all the way back to Rex, climb up and put the key in. Mechanically speaking, this is nothing. You run through empty rooms that have no challenges beyond guards you can easily slip past and gun cameras, while you wait on elevators and watch Snake climb ladders. It really knocks the wind out of your sails. This room highlights how I feel about the remake more than anything else. It is vastly improved because in Rex's chamber you'll find these cooling and heating pipes, so you never have to leave the room to change the key's temperature. And the ladders were replaced with stairs, so the moments of non-interactivity with the ladders are gone. But then, it's still not that fun either, you know? Still almost no guards to sneak around or outmaneuver, it's just running back and forth while you now get codec calls every 2 feet. Honestly, looking at it like this, it's no surprise that I stopped liking Metal Gear Solid like I used to. Because anytime I would play these games in the last several years, I'd be skipping the cutscenes since I knew the story and just wanted to play the game. In that sense, I just think Twin Snakes has better controls and less frustrating garbage. It's too easy, yeah, but I found it more enjoyable to go back to. But it being shackled to the design choices of MGS1 still meant that the game was not going to offer a lot by the end, since the level design just kinda gives up at the end. But to change the tone a bit, this playthrough of MGS1 for the video gave me pause for thought. I had to watch the cutscenes again for necessary footage, this being the first time I've sat down with the story of the game in a few years, and it all clicked in my brain once more. I do think MGS1 is kind of a poor gameplay experience. You can beat both iterations of it in like 2 hours, and a lot of that time will be spent on backtracking and filler, not stealth action, which is what you came to play. 2 hours is roughly how long it takes to beat Metal Gear 2 Solid Snake, but in my replay of that game the other week, I couldn't help but notice how that game is throwing new gameplay ideas and challenges at the player almost constantly. Not all of it lands, but MGS1 is mostly reusing ideas from that game anyway, a game that still managed to escalate the difficulty in natural ways. I don't think MG2 is better than MGS1, that game has plenty of issues I don't like about it either. Backtracking is even worse in that game than MGS1, for example. But I'm just saying that when taken on its gameplay, MGS1 has failed to captivate me in the last 6 years or so. And that's not some Gen Z hot take that I'm pulling out of my ass because I wasn't there to experience it in '98 or whatever. If you look at the press of the time, it was all about how amazing and cinematic the experience was. But it was not difficult to find critics like GameSpot who said that the game was on the easy side and that the gameplay after a certain point felt like a collection of minigames to get you from one cutscene to the next. Not that he said the gameplay was bad, just that it had limitations like the guard's AI and the cutscene to gameplay ratio. I would never say anything bad about this game's gameplay to say it was poorly made. Making games is hard. Making 3D games in the late 90s was even harder. This is when designers were experimenting with what worked in 3D and what would not. This is a remarkable game when looking at it through those lenses. I played it on PS1 like 10 times. It's not a game I'm unfamiliar with. And that also goes for Twin Snakes, which I may have ran through even more times than that. I'm just saying that yeah, as a strictly gameplay experience, it does have issues. But when taking the whole experience in again, that's when I was reminded of how MGS1 feels to play when taken in its totality, and preserving what made that experience great is another thing the Twin Snakes didn't do well. MGS1's plot works so well because of simplicity. It still has a lot of dialogue like most Metal Gear games, but it's very easy to follow, as it's a simple story arc, and it contains some of the most well-written plot twists in any game I've ever played. Like the reveal of Liquid disguising himself as Master Miller is a top-tier video game moment. It works for multiple reasons. For starters, Miller joins the story very early on, and at a moment where Liquid was just seen taking off in the Hind to shoot down some missiles, so even if you could somehow tell it was the same voice actor, it wouldn't be at the front of your mind that you were being played. Second, Miller is a previously established character from Metal Gear 2. Now, most everyone playing MGS1 in 1998 hadn't played or even heard of Metal Gear 2 before, but Snake immediately trusting Miller because they know each other already makes him someone the audience will trust, especially when he offers Snake legitimately good advice.
Snake, you can have regrets if you want to. It's only natural. But you can't keep attacking yourself for things that happened in the past. That road leads to madness. Believe me.
Him asking Naomi prodding questions in that scene also feels perfectly in place because Naomi has been kind of suspicious throughout the whole game.
When was that?
Oh, sometime in the 50s, I guess.
Where?
New York, I think.
Naomi, I thought you didn't have any family.
Well, I researched it after I became an adult.
Because Snake repeatedly says he thinks Campbell and Naomi are hiding something when the DARPA chief and the ArmsTech president mysteriously die by coming into contact with Snake. So in the third act, when Miller calls Snake to help put the Naomi pieces together, you'd think he's coming from a place of concern and accept this new info, and so you don't even think twice about him asking Snake to turn the monitor off when saying all this.
Come on, even a high school student could see past it. The head of the FBI at that time, Edgar Hoover, he was a well-known racist. Didn't Naomi say that her father was Japanese? Yeah. Well, back then, there wasn't a single Asian investigator. Also, in the 1950s, the undercover mafia sting operations hadn't even started yet. They first started in 1960, in Chicago. not New York. But you better check it out. The chief and the president mysteriously dying, and that ninja? Too many strange things are happening.
Furthermore, once it's revealed that Miller's intel on Naomi is true and that she has a vendetta against Snake and has compromised the mission, you'd be extra certain to trust Miller all the way up until the reveal that he was Liquid in disguise, because he told you something that was true. But only now do you realize he needed Naomi caught so he could hopefully find out what changes she made to the Foxdie virus now that his intel forced Campbell and Naomi into revealing the truth to Snake.
Snake, that's not Master Miller.
Campbell, you're too late.
Master Miller's body was just discovered at his home. He's been dead for at least 3 days. I didn't know because my codec link with Master was cut off. But Mei Ling said his transmission signal was coming from inside the base.
So who is it?
Snake, you've been talking to...
Me, dear brother. Liquid, how the... You've served your purpose. You may die now.
Like, it's such a layered twist that would catch every player off guard, even if the evidence is right in front of your face, which is the best kind of twist. And it's also an amazing twist when you learn what the villains are really up to. How Snake and the player are tricked early on when Decoy Octopus, disguised as the DARPA chief, tells Snake that the PAL key is used to deactivate Metal Gear, but there's a trick to using it. The truth being that the DARPA chief was killed by Ocelot in the interrogation room, so they never got his detonation code. The PAL key was the only way to turn it on, but they didn't know how to use it, so they let Snake get the key and figure it out. Even at the end, Liquid and Ocelot talk about the PAL key's power to deactivate the machine because they can see Snake listening in on them. This is another twist that was right in front of your face, because Snake finds the DARPA chief's body in the cell, but it looks like he's been dead for a while, when he only just died from Snake's perspective. Vulcan Raven tells Snake that this was Decoy Octopus, but most players won't then put 2 and 2 together and figure out that what he told Snake in the cell was a series of lies. So all these endgame twists really work. The characters are also really likable and memorable. Snake is the endearing, gruff, kind of awkward and flawed hero, Otacon, the techie looking for redemption, and the game features a rogues gallery of instantly iconic villains who each bring something to the table both in gameplay and story. You certainly weren't going to fight many other bosses in a game at the time who'd read your memory card to prove his psychic powers to Snake, and who would be defeated by switching the controller to the second port. Just instantly iconic stuff. But the plot works so well not just because of the writing. The Twin Snakes features a nearly unchanged script, but the remake shows how everything surrounding the script is what really helps it land. The action-heavy cutscenes are the first thing to be mentioned when talking about this game. The cutscene director, Ryuhei Kitamura, wanted to go for a more faithful redo of the cutscenes. Kojima instead wanted him to lean into his strengths as an action director and give us a new take on the classic story. And thus, you get a version of MGS1 riddled with action set pieces and bullet time effects, since that was all the rage at the time because of the Matrix's popularity. In a vacuum, I really don't mind. I think the scenes look great and are fun to watch with just how insane it gets, like Snake jumping off of a missile to get extra height to land the final blow on the Hind D. Or when Snake sees Metal Gear Rex and his first move is to leap at this giant robot dinosaur, like that was gonna do anything. Or when Gray Fox slices the roof down and kicks the debris at Snake before landing and Snake does a slow motion spin to dodge it. It's the kind of action camp that's really fun to watch. However, if you want to seriously engage with the story of MGS1, it can really take you out of the mood. The setup of MGS1 is that you're playing as a legendary operative on a dangerous sneaking mission. While Solid Snake has plenty of experience going into Shadow Moses Island, the atmosphere of the story is tense, lonely, and foreboding. Nothing Snake can't handle, but something he will be challenged by. The music and visuals and cutscenes of the OG game all provide that feeling, that this is a life or death mission, even for a legendary figure like Solid Snake. But then when you watch the cutscenes of the remake and you see Snake doing god-tier feats, I feel like it took away from the atmosphere. An elevator ambush in the remake feels less dangerous as a player because in gameplay it already is way less dangerous than the original, but it was preceded by Snake surviving an impossible-to-dodge series of shots by flipping out of the way, and the shots colliding somehow causes an explosion on the elevator. Kinda knocks the wind out of the story's sails when the mission doesn't feel that dangerous. The increased visual quality is nice, but Shadow Moses Island just doesn't have the same atmosphere it did in the original. A lot of that comes from limited graphics, yes, but something about the exterior areas all having this black sky makes the mission feel isolated and dangerous, as do the lighting conditions in the interior areas. It's not realistically lit, but it has atmosphere. The Twin Snakes isn't realistic by today's standards, but was shooting for that to the best of the GameCube's ability, and so the areas don't feel like they have as much life to them. Like the warhead storage room in the OG was baked in this green light that is absolutely absent in the remake. The parts where MGS1 was less realistic just provided better ambiance than the remake. And that's something else to consider for MGS Delta. The original MGS3 also was shooting for realism to the best of the PS2's ability, however the game did have its own visual style with the filter that was over everything. Delta's going for pure realism in its lighting and art direction. I think that comes with its own appeal, and thankfully the designers are including an option to make the game look more like the original, so you get the best of both worlds, which is points for Delta that Twin Snakes lacks. But it's just another thing to ponder before the new remake comes out. All aspects of the audio gave the original game a vibe that was unlike anything else, like the rooms before the boss fight with Vulcan Raven. When you pair the dark visuals with the sounds of the Ravens, how much the reverb is on every sound, you really get lost in the atmosphere. A lot of the audio was changed between the original and the remake. The soundtrack is entirely different, which I think is the biggest shame because this playthrough really reminded me of how integral the music is to the experience of the original Metal Gear Solid. Many of the tracks were quiet or somber or gave a feeling of isolation and or intensity. And while it is a nice effort to give each area its own alert theme and evasion theme and each boss their own music, some of which I like Psycho Mantis, I just think the original trounces the remake's music. Having the one boss theme creates an instant mental association where you hear it and are on the edge of your seat automatically regardless of the gameplay mechanics you're surrounded by. When the people behind the games talk about the process for the Twin Snakes, a talking point you'll often hear is that the game had to re-record the nearly 1,000-page script because the audio quality for the PS1 original was recorded in a low-quality fashion that was disguised by the PlayStation's sound quality. But on GameCube, you'd hear more background noise that made the original voiceover unusable. You can listen to the raw audio on YouTube, so I don't know how true that is when you convert that to a different console. But at the end of the day, I feel like the need to redub the game had a lot more to do with the new cutscene direction than anything else. It was nice that David Hayter, the voice of Solid Snake, ensured that the entire original cast returned for the remake, but it's just not the same. The echoey sound quality gave the original voiceover some life to it that's lacking in the remake, which sounds too clean. And then, I don't really understand the performances here. It's like everyone was directed to sound as lifeless as possible. Cam Clark as Liquid is the only person putting some emphasis into it, and even that's pretty toned down compared to his lines in the original. I think many characters like Snake or Campbell sounded more natural in the original before their performances became more like caricatures in later games, but I would never say the acting of MGS2 or 3 or 4 was devoid of life. Quite the opposite. So it really is just the Twin Snakes that feels like that in almost every line read. The loss of the original soundtrack and the original voiceover dealt a body blow to the experience of the Twin Snakes. I'm just going to play some scenes back to back from the original and the remake, and you'll probably see what I'm talking about when I say the audio was a crucial aspect of the original game that was totally lost in the remake.
It's Snake. I'm in front of the disposal facility.
Excellent, Snake. Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
How's that sneaking suit working out?
I'm nice and dry, but it's a little hard to move.
It's Snake. I'm in front of the disposal facility.
Excellent, Snake. Age hasn't slowed you down one bit.
How's that sneaking suit working out?
I'm nice and dry, but it's a little hard to move.
Come on, Colonel. Why don't you stop playing dumb? I'm sorry about Meryl, but I want the lies to end now.
What are you talking about?
Metal Gear was designed to launch a new type of nuclear warhead, wasn't it? You knew it all along, didn't you? Why did you try to hide it?
I'm sorry.
Can't tell the grunts, huh? You've changed a lot.
Come on, Colonel. Why don't you stop playing dumb? I'm sorry about Meryl, but I want the lies to end now.
What are you talking about?
Metal Gear was designed to launch a new type of nuclear warhead, wasn't it? You knew it all along, didn't you? Why did you try to hide it?
I'm sorry.
Can't tell the grunts, huh? You've changed a lot. Fox, why? What do you want from me?
I am a prisoner of death. Only you can free me.
Fox, stay out of this. What about Naomi? She's hell-bent on taking revenge for you.
Naomi.
You're the only one who can stop her.
No, I can't.
Why?
Because I'm the one who killed her parents.
Fox, why? What do you want from me?
I'm a prisoner of death. Only you can free me.
Fox, stay out of this. What about Naomi? She's hell-bent on taking revenge for you.
Naomi.
You're the only one who can stop her.
No, I can't.
Why?
Because I'm the one who killed her parents.
Now, in front of you, I can finally die.
It's no
After
good.
that
I can't do
fight, I was taken from the battle, neither truly alive nor truly dead. An undying shadow in a world of light. But soon, it will finally end.
Now, in front of you, I can finally
It's no good.
die.
I can't do it.
After Zanzibar land, I was taken from the battle, neither truly alive nor truly dead. An undying shadow in a world of light. But soon it will finally end.
I hope these examples highlight how much everything that surrounds a story can bolster it. This is basically the same script, but the lackluster voiceover and the lack of memorable music almost completely changes every scene. Delta doesn't really have to worry about this. Delta is using the exact same motion capture and voiceover from the original MGS3. Now, that's unfortunate in the sense that they can't really make any improvements to the story, but it does help in the sense that they can't make it worse. I think most of the Metal Gear Solid sequels have issues with their writing. I'm not going to hide that I believe that. MGS1 is one of the better ones because it's simple and effective, but there are issues I have with this game's story too. For example, there are points where cutscenes just go on too long. But in this game specifically, I have an issue with cutscenes that reach a natural conclusion where your brain is ready to get back to gameplay, but then the scene just keeps going on for several more minutes. Biggest example of this is the part where Snake meets Otacon. This lasts for several minutes as Otacon realizes that the machine he's built is a nuclear-equipped walking deathmobile. That's fine, but after several minutes of that, Snake makes contact with Meryl, who then gets caught and hangs up. Naturally, you'd pick up the controller ready for the next gameplay sequence, but then Snake just talks to Otacon for several more minutes about how the name Otacon is short for Otaku Convention, how he wanted to get into science to make robots just like the ones in anime. Like, if any of us were Snake, I'd imagine we'd be like, Otacon, huh? Weird name. Anyway, gotta go. And then the explanation for the name could have just been in an optional codec call. The script is just very verbose and often melodramatic. I never really liked Meryl as a character in this game because of that. Every scene with her feels like some giant speech, even when she's bleeding out after multiple shots from a sniper rifle. But that's the thing with this game. More often than not, it just works. Like, yes, Sniper Wolf getting shot in the lungs with a sniper rifle would make it pretty difficult for her to deliver a several-minute-long sermon about her life before dying. Death by gunshot tends to be pretty frantic and gruesome. And yeah, it's kind of odd. Sniper Wolf is a character who has spent all of her screen time trying to gleefully murder you and everyone you care about, and Snake then taunting about how he was going to get her first. So switching from that to a long emotional death scene might not make sense on paper, but when you play through the game, it just all makes sense in the way only someone who has played the game could understand. The emotion in the line reads from the actors and the iconic enclosure music makes this a beautiful scene you could watch over and over and still be hit pretty hard by. Speaking from experience, since I've seen this scene like 100 times.
I joined this group of revolutionaries to take my revenge on the world. But I have shamed myself and my people. I am no longer the wolf I was born to be. In the name of vengeance, I sold my body and my soul. Now I am nothing more than a dog.
Wolves are noble animals. They're not like dogs. In Yupik, the word for wolf is Keglenek, and the Aleuts revere them as honorable cousins. They call mercenaries like us dogs of war. It's true, we're all for sale at some price or another, but you're different. Untamed, solitary. You're no dog. You're a wolf.
Compare that to the remake, which has that dry delivery of everything and doesn't have that iconic music, and it's just not as good.
It's true. We're all for sale for some price or another, but you're different.
And I'm gonna start asking myself questions like, how's she even talking at all right now? You reach the end of the game and the fight with Liquid feels way less cinematic because the room lacks the lighting of the original and there's no iconic boss theme playing. The escape scene feels pretty goddamn clunky to play in the original, but man, do you feel something when hearing the escape theme, which is basically just the boss theme but with a choir. A track that gives you a feeling of desperation as you're on your way out, but hope too, because the light is at the end of the tunnel and you just need to reach it. The remake obviously lacks this. Instead, it has a Matrix cutscene in the middle of the escape. But while I'm talking about the endgame of MGS1, can I just say that I've always liked the Otacon ending of MGS1 better than Meryl's? Saying that in the past usually got me a lot of comments that would inform me that the Meryl one is canon. I already knew that, and never said anything to the contrary. And then people would tell me that Snake not enduring the torture scene was out of character. And now I'll say that much I do agree with. But when I say I like the Otacon ending better, I'm only referring to the fact that I think Snake and Otacon build more chemistry throughout the story, so them, at the end, fully realizing they have a lot more in common than it would seem at surface level, felt like a more interesting ending. Especially with Otacon there when Snake finds Meryl's body to tell him that he can't just feel sorry for himself. It shows how much Otacon has grown in the story. I guess I just found that more interesting than hero saves girl and rides off into the sunset. Not that her dying to fuel Snake and Otacon's growth is the greatest and most original trope either, but still. Her presence in the game mostly felt like monologues anyway. Now, to be fair, Otacon has a lot of those too, but I feel like Snake has more to say in response, which to me felt like the two had more chemistry than Snake and Meryl when they were on screen together. But no matter which ending you get, it's still a spectacularly epic finish. Super cinematic and all that good stuff. And I always like this one moment where Snake tells Naomi a lie about Gray Fox's final moment in the hopes of helping her heal from his death in a way the truth never would.
I heard about my brother.
I'm sorry, but he had one last message he wanted to say to you. He told me to tell you to forget about him and to go on with your own life.
Frankie said that?
Yeah. He also said he'll always love you. Naomi, your brother just saved you, me, and the whole world. He fought with every ounce of strength in his body.
Maybe now he's finally found some peace.
As Naomi then reinforces the main theme of the story, that Snake now has the power to choose whatever life he wants. Fox die will come for him someday, but he can spend the rest of his life doing whatever he wants. And that his genes don't define his fate, despite what Naomi might have believed earlier or what Liquid believed to his dying breath. In either ending, he's learned that things are worth living for and important causes are worth fighting for, since he came into this story retired, in hiding, and drunk. It's a fantastic arc and ending. This is the core of the story in the original and the remake, and for the final time it's just so much more impactful than the original because all those elements that surround it like acting and music. There is a mod for the Twin Snakes that I loaded in Dolphin where you can listen to the original soundtrack while playing the game. Unsurprisingly, the gameplay experience is enhanced by having the atmospheric score put back into the game. Dialogue that doesn't sound as well delivered still manages to feel better on the ears when it's accompanied by the original music.
This is Snake. Colonel, can you hear me?
Loud and clear. What's the situation, Snake?
Looks like the elevator in the back is the only way up.
Unfortunately, the cutscenes are what they are. It would have to be a much more substantial project to restore the original audio with these animations, but the mod went a long way in helping the mood of the remake. But all that is to say, do I think the Twin Snakes is a bad game? Definitely not. The thing about this game is that I think it's enjoyable enough to play. I just think MGS2 mechanics are fun to use. The problem with the game when you assess it critically is that it's pretty clear that the game does not make good use of its mechanics since it's plopped into a game that doesn't really put them to work. That's a fact with the Twin Snakes that's pretty difficult to avoid. And then I feel like the soul of the original game was lost in translation with the new cutscenes, the new dub, the new music, and the new visuals. I do not think the Twin Snakes is a bad game. I enjoy playing it enough, but I think it's just got massive flaws as a remake. Some of the flaws the Twin Snakes has comes from it being a remake of MGS1, a game that is also very flawed in many ways, evident towards the end of both games. But how the Twin Snakes handles backtracking and the fact that it's less clunky to play almost automatically makes me think it's more enjoyable than MGS1, which is why in recent years I've mostly returned to the remake if I was looking to blitz through Shadow Moses Island. However, it's pretty undeniable, to me anyway, that MGS1 is the superior game when taken in its totality. It's the superior work of art, if that makes sense. It just comes together far better than the remake and somehow feels less dated in the process. MGS1 is the iconic gaming classic. The Twin Snakes is an interesting update to that experience. It has its moments and does some things better, but definitely doesn't feel like it had the polish or thought put into it that MGS1 or 2 had, which makes the game suffer. Not to say it's not polished, but to say that it clearly has gaping holes in it. As I said way earlier, the Twin Snakes feels kind of like a fiscal report filler game, the kind of game that wasn't bad or made without soul or whatever, but the kind of game that was padding the publisher's roster rather than the game they were putting everything into, because it was just one of many Metal Gear games coming out in the mid-2000s. By comparison, MGS Delta feels like it's the big Konami effort of the year, as this is the revival of the Metal Gear series in the modern age. So I think they're expecting more out of this game than they did the Twin Snakes. Since there's more riding on Delta, I imagine many of these kinds of issues will be avoided. But hey, only time will tell. The game is dropping in a few weeks, and I'm curious to play it since MGS3 used to be my favorite game of all time. But before it comes out, I'd like to revisit MGS2 and 3 in video form, so I hope you'll join me for that. Besides that, I don't have much else to add today, so I'll close by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.